My father died broke, leaving me with nothing but debts and resentment. While cleaning out his tiny apartment, I found his favorite book, one he'd read countless times. Tucked inside was an old, uncashed check for $500,000 from 40 years ago, along with a heartbreaking note from my mother, who had abandoned us. The truth about why she left would change everything I thought I knew about my father. But before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, what's your favorite book? Drop the name in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more amazing stories every day. Now, let's head back to that life-changing discovery. My name is Daniel Foster, and for 35 years, I had carried the weight of believing that my father was a failure and my mother was a woman who had abandoned her family for a better life. When my father, Robert, died of a heart attack in his cramped studio apartment, I thought I was inheriting nothing but his debts and the bitter legacy of a man who had never managed to make anything of himself. I'm a certified public accountant, and I've built a successful practice helping small businesses manage their finances. I've always prided myself on being practical, responsible with money, and nothing like the man who raised me. Robert Foster had worked as a maintenance supervisor at a local factory for 30 years, living paycheck to paycheck, never owning a home, never taking a vacation, never seeming to want anything more than his modest existence. Growing up, I was embarrassed by our circumstances. While my friends' families lived in nice houses in the suburbs, we rented a small apartment above a convenience store. While their fathers wore suits to work, mine came home in coveralls that smelled of machine oil and industrial cleaner. And while their mothers packed elaborate lunches and attended school events, mine was simply gone. Catherine Foster, my mother, had left when I was 8 years old. One day she was there, making breakfast and helping me with my homework, and the next day she was gone. My father's explanation was brief and painful. "Your mother decided she wanted a different life, son. Sometimes people change their minds about what makes them happy." I had spent years wondering what was so wrong with us that she had chosen to leave. Was it our small apartment? My father's blue-collar job? The fact that we shopped at thrift stores and clipped coupons? As I grew older, my resentment toward them both deepened, toward her for abandoning us, and toward him for not being the kind of man worth staying for. The call about my father's death came on a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing quarterly reports for a client when my phone rang with news that Robert Foster had collapsed at work and died before the ambulance arrived. He was 63 years old, and according to the hospital, I was his only emergency contact. The funeral was small, just me, a few of his coworkers, and Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment next to his. As I stood beside his casket, I felt more obligation than grief. This was the man who raised me, but I realized I barely knew him. We had spoken maybe once a month in recent years, brief conversations about his health and my work that never went deeper than surface pleasantries. After the service, I drove to his apartment to begin the grim task of sorting through his belongings. The building was in the same neighborhood where we had lived when I was a child. Not the worst area of town, but certainly not the best. His apartment was on the 3rd floor, a studio with a kitchenette, a fold-out couch, and a small table that served as both desk and dining room. The space was clean, but sparse. My father had never been one to accumulate possessions, and what he did have was practical rather than decorative. A few changes of clothes, basic kitchen supplies, a small television, and everywhere, books. The man who had never finished high school had somehow amassed a collection of several hundred books, most of them classics that he had bought secondhand and read until the spines were cracked and the pages were soft with handling. As I began sorting through his things, I found the evidence of the financial struggles that had defined his life. Unpaid medical bills, past due notices for utilities, a bank statement showing a checking account with $127.43. There was no savings account, no investments, no life insurance policy. Just debt and the few possessions of a man who had lived his entire adult life on the edge of poverty. I was boxing up his books when I came across his copy of The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. It was clearly his favorite. The cover was nearly worn away, and the pages were filled with penciled notes in his careful handwriting.
As I lifted it to place it in the donation box, something slipped out from between the pages and fluttered to the floor. It was an envelope, yellowed with age, with my father's name written on it in elegant handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside the envelope was a folded piece of paper and something else that made my heart stop. A check. The check was made out to Robert Foster for $500,000. $500,000. It was dated March 15th, 1984, nearly 40 years ago, and it was signed by someone named Charles Whitmore. The memo line read, "Final settlement as agreed." I stared at the check in disbelief. $500,000. In 1984, that would have been worth even more than it was today. It was enough money to buy a house, to start a business, to completely change the trajectory of a person's life, and it had been sitting in my father's favorite book for 4 decades, never deposited, never cashed, apparently never even acknowledged. With shaking hands, I unfolded the piece of paper that had been with the check. It was a letter, written in the same elegant handwriting as the envelope, and as I read it, my understanding of my entire childhood began to crumble. "My dearest Robert," the letter began, and I recognized the signature at the bottom. "All my love, Catherine," my mother. I know this is not what either of us wanted, but I hope you can understand why it has to be this way. My family has made their position clear. If I choose you, I lose everything. Not just the money, though that's what they think matters most, but my relationship with them, my place in their world, everything I've ever known. I've tried to convince them that love should matter more than social standing, that a good man's character should count more than his bank account. But they see your background, your job, our little apartment, and they can't imagine that I could be happy with a life so different from what they planned for me. The check is their idea, a settlement, they call it, as if our love was some kind of business transaction that could be resolved with money. They think if they pay you enough, you'll walk away and let me marry the man they've chosen for me. Charles Whitmore is a good man, Robert, but he's not you. He'll never be you.
I want you to know that I would give up everything for you. The money, the family, the life they've planned for me. I would live in our little apartment forever if it meant waking up next to you every morning. But I also know you, my darling man, and I know you would never let me make that sacrifice. Also, I'm worried about Daniel, his future. I'm afraid that without my family help, we won't be able to give him a nice life, health insurance, and a good education. So I'm making the choice for both of us. I'm taking the check to you, and then I'm going to do what they want. I'm going to marry Charles and live the life they've planned for me. But I need you to know that every day for the rest of my life, I'll be thinking about what we could have had together. Please cash the check, Robert. Use the money to build a good life for Daniel and yourself. Find someone who can love you the way you deserve to be loved, someone who doesn't come with the complications that I bring. Be happy, my love. Be happy for both of us, and send my love to Daniel. I know you are going to do the best to give our precious boy a good life. All my love, always and forever, Catherine. I read the letter 3 times before the full impact of what I was seeing hit me. My mother hadn't abandoned us because she was selfish or unhappy with our life. She had been forced to choose between love and the family she knew, and she had chosen to sacrifice her own happiness to spare my father the burden of her family's disapproval. But the check that could have changed everything, had never been cashed. For 40 years, my father had carried this letter and this money, and he had chosen poverty over what he must have seen as profiting from the loss of the woman he loved. I sank into my father's worn armchair, still holding the letter and the check, trying to process what this meant. My father hadn't been a failure. He had been a man who had loved someone so much that he couldn't bring himself to benefit from losing her. He had chosen to live modestly, to struggle financially, rather than cash a check that represented the end of his dreams. And my mother had been forced into an impossible choice by a family that valued social status over love, and she had made the decision she thought would be best for everyone, even though it broke her heart. I spent the rest of the day searching through my father's belongings with new eyes, looking for any other clues about the story I had never known. In a shoebox under his bed, I found more letters, dozens of them, all addressed to my father, all from my mother, spanning the years after she had left. The letters painted a picture of a woman who had never stopped loving the man she had been forced to leave. She wrote about her marriage to Charles Whitmore, describing him as kind but distant, a man she respected but could never love the way she had loved my father. She wrote about the birth of her children. I had half-siblings I had never known about, and about the life of privilege that felt empty without the man she truly wanted to share it with. But most heartbreakingly, she wrote about me. Letter after letter, asking about how I was doing in school, whether I was happy, if I remembered her at all. She sent birthday cards that had never been given to me, Christmas presents that had never been opened, school photos that she must have somehow obtained to keep track of how I was growing up. I know you think it's better if Daniel believes I simply left, but it breaks my heart to think that he might grow up believing his mother didn't love him. Please tell him, Robert. Please tell him that leaving him was the hardest thing I've ever done, and that not a day goes by that I don't regret it.
My father had never told me. He had let me grow up believing that my mother had abandoned us, rather than explain the complicated truth. He had protected her memory by taking on the role of the inadequate father who couldn't keep his family together. I found evidence of other sacrifices too, medical bills that showed my father had delayed his own treatment for years, probably because he couldn't afford it. A letter from my college admissions office thanking him for his generous donation to the scholarship fund, money he must have scraped together to help other kids get the education he wanted me to have. The picture that emerged was of a man who had spent his entire adult life quietly sacrificing for the people he loved, never asking for recognition or gratitude, never explaining the choices he had made or the prices he had paid. As the sun set outside his small apartment window, I sat surrounded by the evidence of a life I had completely misunderstood. My father hadn't been a failure. He had been a man of extraordinary integrity and love. And my mother hadn't been a woman who abandoned her family. She had been a woman caught between two choices, who had tried to do what she thought was best for everyone. The next morning, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days earlier. I was going to find my mother. It took 3 weeks of investigation, but I finally tracked down Catherine Whitmore to an address in Westchester County, New York. According to public records, Charles Whitmore had died 5 years earlier, leaving her a widow with 2 adult children. She was 71 years old now, and I had no idea if she would want to hear from the son she had been forced to leave behind 37 years ago. I drove to her address on a Saturday morning, my father's letter and the uncashed check in an envelope on the passenger seat. The house was everything I had expected. A sprawling colonial in an exclusive neighborhood, the kind of place that spoke of old money and established social position. It was the life my mother had chosen over love, and as I sat in my car looking at it, I tried to imagine what it had cost her. I rang the doorbell with trembling hands, not sure what I would say or how she would react. The woman who answered the door was elegant and well-preserved, with silver hair and the kind of understated style that comes from a lifetime of privilege. But her eyes were the same green eyes I remembered from my childhood, and when she saw me, they filled with tears. "Daniel," she whispered,
her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Daniel! Is that really you?" "Hello, Mom," I said, and the word felt strange on my lips after so many years. She invited me in, and we sat in her beautifully appointed living room, two strangers who shared a history neither of us knew how to navigate. She looked at me with a mixture of joy and sorrow, as if she couldn't quite believe I was real. "You look so much like him. Like your father. How is he? Is he well?" "He died 3 weeks ago," I said gently, and watched as her face crumpled with grief. "Oh no! Oh, Robert, I always thought maybe someday." I pulled out the envelope and handed it to her. "I found this in his things, your letter and the uncashed check. He never cashed it, Mom. For 40 years, he kept your letter and he never cashed the check." She opened the envelope with shaking hands, and when she saw the check and her own letter, she began to cry in earnest.
"He kept it," she said through her tears. "All these years, he kept it." "He kept everything," I said. "All your letters, all the cards you sent me, everything. He never threw any of it away." "I wrote to him for 20 years, she said. "I sent him pictures of you that I somehow managed to get, updates about your life that I gathered from mutual acquaintances. I kept hoping he would write back, that maybe we could find a way to—" "But he never did." "He thought you were better off without him," I said. "He thought he would just be a reminder of what you had given up." We spent the next 4 hours talking, filling in the gaps of 37 years. She told me about her marriage to Charles, which had been comfortable but loveless, about her children who had grown up privileged but distant, about the life of social obligations and charity events that had never felt real to her. "I did what I thought was right," she said. "I thought I was protecting you and your father from my family's disapproval, from a life of being looked down upon and excluded, from a life without meanings to survive. I grew up so privileged, I couldn't understand how we would survive without my family's money. But now, seeing that even though Robert never cashed the money, and he raised you so well, look at you. I was wrong, Daniel. I was so wrong. I should have chosen love. I should have chosen you and Robert and our little apartment and our simple life. It would have been worth more than all of this." "Why didn't you ever try to contact me directly?" I asked. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that you hated me for leaving. Afraid that you wouldn't want to see me. Afraid that I had lost the right to be your mother when I walked away. And as the years went by, it became harder and harder to imagine how I could explain what I had done." I told her about my childhood, about growing up believing she had abandoned us, about the resentment I had carried toward both her and my father. I told her about the man I had thought my father was, and about the man I now knew he had actually been. "He was the best man I ever knew," she said when I finished. "He was kind and honest and decent, and he loved you more than anything in the world. He told me he was going to make sure you had every opportunity he never had. He did. I just never realized it." As the afternoon wore on, we began to build something that neither of us had dared to hope for, a relationship. Not the mother-son bond we had lost, but something new, something built on understanding and forgiveness rather than obligation. "What will you do with the check?" she asked as I prepared to leave. "I'm going to cash it, and I'm going to use the money to do something my father would have been proud of." 6 months later, I established the Robert Foster Education Foundation, using the $500,000 check and additional funds I contributed to create scholarships for children from working-class families who wanted to pursue higher education. The foundation's mission statement reads, "In memory of a man who understood that the greatest wealth is not what you accumulate, but what you give away." My mother became the foundation's first major donor, contributing a substantial sum from her own inheritance. And she became a regular part of my life, and we began to build the relationship we had lost all those years ago. It wasn't the same as having a mother throughout my childhood, but it was something precious in its own right. A connection based on choice rather than obligation, on understanding rather than expectation.
I kept my father's apartment for a year after his death, visiting it regularly to sit in his chair and read his books. I found comfort in the space where he had lived so quietly and with such dignity, surrounded by the books that had been his companions and the memories he had treasured in silence. In his copy of The Grapes of Wrath, I found more than just my mother's letter. Throughout the margins, he'd written notes that revealed his thoughts about love, sacrifice, and what it meant to be a good man. On the page where Tom Joad says goodbye to his mother, my father had written, "Sometimes loving someone means letting them go, even when it breaks your heart." On another page, beside a passage about dignity in the face of hardship, he had noted, "A man's worth isn't measured by what he has, but by what he's willing to give up for the people he loves." These marginalia became a roadmap to understanding the man who had raised me, a man who had chosen principle over profit, love over money, and sacrifice over self-interest at every turn. I also discovered that my father had been quietly helping other families in our neighborhood for years. Mrs. Chen, his elderly neighbor, told me that he had been paying for her groceries when her Social Security wasn't enough. The superintendent of our old building revealed that my father had been anonymously covering rent for a single mother with 3 children who was struggling to make ends meet. "Your father never wanted credit for any of it," Mrs. Chen told me. "He would just say that people should look out for each other, and that he was lucky to be able to help." Lucky. A man who lived paycheck to paycheck, who delayed his own medical care, who wore the same clothes for years, considered himself lucky because he could help others. The more I learned about my father's life, the more I realized that I had inherited something far more valuable than money. I had inherited his example. He had shown me what it meant to live with integrity, to put others before yourself, and to find wealth in relationships rather than bank accounts. My relationship with my mother continued to deepen over the months that followed. She began visiting me regularly, and I introduced her to my wife Sarah and our 2 young children, grandchildren she had never known she had. Watching her with my kids was both heartwarming and heartbreaking, as I saw the grandmother she could have been all along. "I missed so much," she said one afternoon as she watched my 5-year-old daughter Emma playing in the backyard. "I missed your childhood, your wedding, the birth of your children. I can't get those years back." "No, but we can make the most of the years we have left." She told me more about her life with Charles Whitmore, painting a picture of a marriage that had been respectful but passionless. Charles had been a good man, but he had never been Robert Foster. Her children from that marriage, my half-siblings, were polite but distant, products of a privileged upbringing that had emphasized achievement over affection. "She tried to love them the way she loved you," she said, "but it was different. Everything about that life was different. I was playing a role, being the person my family wanted me to be, but I was never really myself." "And now?" I asked. "Now I feel like I'm finally coming home," she said. 1 year after my father's death, my mother and I decided to visit his grave together. It was the first time she had been to the cemetery, and she stood beside his headstone for a long time, her hand resting on the simple granite marker that bore his name and the dates of his birth and death.
"I'm sorry, Robert," she whispered. "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to choose love. I'm sorry I let them convince me that money and status mattered more than what we had together. I'm sorry I wasted so many years living a life that wasn't real." She had brought flowers, simple daisies, the kind my father used to pick for her from the vacant lot behind our apartment building when they were young and in love, and thought they had all the time in the world. "He forgave you a long time ago," I told her. "Keeping that check, keeping your letters,
That wasn't about holding on to hurt. That was about holding on to love. "I know," she said, "but I needed to say it anyway." As we stood there together, I thought about the different paths our lives might have taken if my mother had made a different choice 40 years ago. Would we have been happier as a family? Would my father have lived longer if he hadn't carried the weight of that sacrifice? Would I have grown up with a different understanding of love and loss? But I also realized that the path we had taken, painful as it was, had taught us all something valuable about the nature of love. My father had learned that sometimes loving someone means letting them go. My mother had learned that choosing security over love comes with a price that compounds over time. And I had learned that the most important inheritance a parent can leave is not money, but an example of how to live with integrity and compassion. The Robert Foster Educational Foundation has now awarded scholarships to over 200 students from working-class families. Each year at our annual scholarship dinner, I tell the story of the man the foundation is named after, a man who understood that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the love you give away. My mother attends every one of these dinners, and she always brings a copy of my father's favorite book to display at the registration table. Inside the front cover, she has written, "In memory of Robert Foster, who taught us that the greatest riches are the ones you can't deposit in a bank." The uncashed check that started this journey now hangs framed in my office, not as a symbol of money, but as a reminder of the choices we make for love. Below it is a photo of my parents from when they were young, a picture I found among my father's things, showing two people who were rich in all the ways that mattered most. My children know the story of their grandfather, the man who chose love over money and principle over profit. They understand that the comfortable life they enjoy was built not on the foundation of that uncashed check, but on the foundation of his example, his quiet generosity, his unwavering integrity, and his understanding that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. Sometimes I wonder what my father would think of the foundation, of the reconciliation with my mother, of the way his story has inspired others to think differently about wealth and success. I think he would be pleased, but not surprised. He always believed that good things came to people who did the right thing even when the right thing was difficult. The last entry in his copy of The Grapes of Wrath was written in the margin beside the book's final scene. Where Rose of Sharon nurses a starving stranger, my father had written, "This is what it means to be human, to give what you have to someone who needs it more, even when you have almost nothing left to give." That, I realized, was the real inheritance my father left me. Not the uncashed check, not the material possessions, but the understanding that a life well lived is measured not by what you accumulate, but by what you're willing to sacrifice for others. The check may have been worth $500,000, but the lesson it represented was priceless. And unlike money, which can be spent and lost, the example of my father's love and sacrifice will continue to pay dividends for generations to come. In the end, Robert Foster wasn't a poor man at all. He was rich in all the ways that truly matter, and he left his son the most valuable inheritance possible, the knowledge that love, not money, is the only currency that really counts. What an absolutely beautiful story about the true meaning of wealth and the sacrifices we make for love. Robert's decision to never cash that check shows us that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones we choose not to take. What do you think about Robert's choice to live in poverty rather than profit from losing the woman he loved? Have you ever discovered that someone you knew had been making quiet sacrifices you never realized? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this incredible story of love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of inheritance, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more amazing stories every day. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.